Hello and welcome to Fast Talkers with me, Jennie Gow. Now, I don't know about you, but I am missing people from the paddock and Formula One and motorsport in general. So whilst we have this kind of forced hiatus, I thought it was a good opportunity to get some of those paddock people to come together and discuss what we're all talking about at the moment. So over the next half an hour, we're going to talk about lots of different things. But let me introduce my three willing victims for the first show. First of all, we have Chris Medland, who is joining us, F1 freelance journalist and broadcaster. Jess McFadyen. Jess, I didn't even ask you how to pronounce your surname properly. That's rude, isn't it? Did I get it right?
Yeah, McFadyen's pretty much spot on. So
there we go.
First try.
Okay, and Jess has an important title because out of all of us, she's the only one with a really proper job. She is Director of Digital Strategy at Motorsport Network. Hello, Jess.
Hello, thanks for that intro. That was great, thanks.
You're welcome. And Sam Collins, who is another motorsport technical journalist, because he's got a box of technical things just by his side. What have you got next to you, Sam?
Mostly model trains, actually, because we're in a bit of my office that doesn't normally do motorsport stuff, but the lighting was bad in the motorsport corner, so we have the train corner.
I love it. What train are you building at the moment?
I'm not building, I sell them. And between races, I sell toy trains. So yeah, there's some steam trains and some this sort of stuff.
Wow, who knew? We've learned a lot already in this program.
Yeah, there you go.
So there are two big talking points, I suppose, before the season starts. And over the last few days, weeks, I suppose things have started to get a greater intensity. The start of the season, obviously, July the 5th, double header in Austria before we head to the Hungaroring. That's a big talking point, and we'll come on to that in a little while. But first of all, we have to address the largest elephant in the room, which is quite obviously the matter of diversity in motorsport, or the lack of it. I think it's something that we all kind of have spoken about in the past at great length when we've been out at races. We've had chats about it because, let's face it, we all know that there's a huge problem with diversity in motorsport. So I wanted to start, Sam, by asking you what you've thought of events over the last week and a half, 2 weeks.
It's been really eye-opening because things have changed quite a lot very, very quickly. Now, normally I'm one of these people who I don't think protest marches and protests really work very often, but the Black Lives Matter protests have really made a huge difference. And Lewis Hamilton's comments in particular on social media, not all have been 100% accurate, but they've really opened the eyes of the sport to the lack of diversity there is in our sport. And, you know, that's gone right through motorsport, not just Formula One. I mean, the NASCAR race that happened a few days ago, you saw Bubba Wallace with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and the pit crews all standing there. It's made a massive difference to the sport at the moment. The question is, will the governing bodies carry that through going forwards?
I mean, Jess, out of all of us, I suppose you are the newest to the paddock. Is it something that you still find glaringly obvious when you walk into any circuit?
I guess it's something that you can't ignore. There aren't very many other people apart from mainly white men, and tend to be slightly older as well. So as a newcomer, it can be quite daunting, I guess. I mean, I still remember one of the first times I ever walked into the media centre and kind of seeing all eyes kind of like, who is this new person coming in, and you know, you're not part of the club, was the sense that I felt. Whether or not that was actually the intention, I guess that's quite important to also say that I have never personally received any criticism or anything against myself for being, you know, a woman in motorsport, which is another element of diversity that the FIA and governing bodies have tried to address. But it does feel very much like a clique, I guess, of certain people, and it can be quite difficult to crack. But my personal experience has been one of very much openness from most people that I've come into contact with, and it's never been something that has stopped my own personal experience of working in motorsport. It's never come against it, but it is something that is motorsport in itself just seems to be pretty inaccessible across a wide spectrum of reasons. So it's just something that seems to have been fairly innate. But as Sam said, it will be interesting to see how that is addressed and what steps can be taken to make sure that doesn't continue. But I think a lot has happened naturally, but there's loads more that can be done as well.
Sam, do you see things that could easily change or obviously change?
Yeah, I mean, as Jess said, we've seen these initiatives from the FIA and other governing bodies to encourage more females into the sport. What we haven't seen are those outreach efforts into more inner cities or urban areas. You know, Lewis Hamilton's a great example. He came up from a working class part of Stevenage and just was lucky enough to be scouted and picked up and go through. But how many other Lewis Hamiltons are there out there in these urban areas? I mean, could be Sao Paulo, could be New York, it could be London, could be anywhere, could be Birmingham even, Black Nigel Mansell, for example. But I think also the sport's got a lot of work to do in terms of other types of diversity. I mean, we haven't had an openly homosexual driver. We haven't had a trans driver. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how the sport would react to that, because I feel there's still a long journey to travel on that road for it to become acceptable. I think there'd be a lot of hostility in some of the countries we go to, definite hostility, because it's illegal in some cases.
I mean, Chris, people talk about privilege, and I think it's very hard for people like you and I to feel sometimes unable to say anything. And it took Lewis calling out a lot of people to react to it. Do you think that's something that we have to do more of? We have to be more reactive?
Yeah, definitely. I guess, and in a sense, not reactive, but just active, more proactive, because what Lewis said then seemed to trigger some of the younger drivers like Charles Leclerc, like Lando Norris, like Alex Albon, George Russell, all coming out and saying staying silent isn't good enough. And to be fair, I was very impressed. Those guys are younger than me. You mentioned to Jess about as one of the newer ones in the paddock, and that used to be me, and now I'm getting on a bit. But yeah, I was
not young anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm thinking some of these guys are more than 10 years younger than me, and they felt brave enough, in a sense, to actually say, to even admit that they weren't sure what to say, but that they needed to say something, and that they're worried about getting involved in the argument almost. And I was actually the same. And I've got years on them. I should be more mature. I should be maybe more confident in what I say. But taking to social media to kind of go, yeah, I totally agree with what Lewis is saying, or I totally agree with what another driver's saying, or to give my opinion on it, actually felt like a big step, and it shouldn't be. And I think that is something that we all need to break down a bit. Those of us that, because it's clearly we're not the ones at the focus of this argument in the sense of demanding change for ourselves. But for just a better world, we are very much supportive of that. And the only way that you really are going to start to get the momentum building is by speaking out and giving voices as well to more people. So I think it is something we need to do more proactively, yeah.
Chris, have you been surprised at how vocal Lewis has been during this sort of break that we've had, this forced break?
A little. He's been increasingly impressive, the way that he had started using his voice the longer he's been in Formula One on really important topics that transcend the sport, because really he's the only driver that truly does transcend our sport. We've got other superstar drivers, but almost everyone in the world knows who Lewis Hamilton is, and he does have an ability to speak on a huge platform. And it's been very impressive the more he's done that. It was environmental issues towards the end of last year he spoke really well about. So in a sense, I haven't been too surprised. And also because I think in being in isolation or in lockdown or away from everyone, that's actually opened Lewis's kind of mind to just being able to speak whatever he wants, because he's not looking around and worrying what other people are going to say directly to him, or he doesn't have to walk through the paddock and have a PR person say, well, we've got a lot of interest in this press session now. He kind of doesn't have that direct dealing that I can understand why it would make him uncomfortable if he says what he feels and really believes, but then he has to sit through 15 minutes with us a lot, dare I say it, and field questions about it, some of which would be fair, but some which might be leading or might be difficult, and he might not feel quite so comfortable doing it. It might slightly rein him in. So I think this has come at, in a sense, at a good time to let him freely speak. And I think it's been very impressive, actually. I think he's been right on the money, but also it's good to see that he's acknowledging the platform he has and the reach he has, the ability he has to get this message across, and doing it.
I've spoken to Lewis in interviews every year now for, I think, the last 10 years. And this is the most outspoken he's been. This is the most enabled he's felt clearly to stand up and really say what he thinks. I mean, I had a conversation, and I listened back to it yesterday, in 2018 at Silverstone, asking him, you know, what do you really think about diversity? How do you think we can go forward? And what do you want your legacy to be? And, you know, he said all these things about, I want to leave a legacy, and I want better diversity, but there was no proper soul to it, I felt. Whereas this time, and Sam, I'm sure you'll agree, he said exactly what he wanted to say, the way he said it. And maybe it is because he doesn't fear, you know, all of us journalists lumping on him and all of the newspapers and all of the fans. But there's something has changed within him that has made him want to have a greater influence right now.
This has been building up for a long time. I remember when the Black Lives Matter protests really started, it was a few years ago, where Colin Kay started taking a knee in the national anthems. And when that was at its height, Formula One arrived in Austin for the US Grand Prix, and there was great speculation, would Lewis Hamilton take a knee? And he didn't. But he was making quite a lot of commentary about it on social media. I personally was a bit disappointed he didn't take a knee, because he had that great opportunity. I think if that situation was now, and we might even see him do it in Austria, he may take a knee in Austria, same way a lot of the NASCAR teams did. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I think it's just built up to a point that he just couldn't stay silent any longer, and he was clearly mightily upset with the rest of the sport for not speaking out. A lot of engineers, journalists were speaking out on social media, probably not on Lewis's radar, but the other drivers weren't, and the teams weren't, and that was a real shame. I would have liked to have seen Mercedes make a comment right up front, because he's their driver. He should have had that conversation. And in fact, I think it was in testing, or maybe you asked him, Jenny, he made a comment at some point in a press conference, I remember, that he'd had that conversation with Toto Wolff, and Toto said he'd address it, but we're still not seeing enough comment coming out of Mercedes at the moment.
That's interesting you say that. Have we seen enough comment, all of you, coming out of Formula One, do you think, about this?
Not really.
No, I'd say no as well. I think that, especially as Sam mentions NASCAR, I know they're racing actively at the moment, but that's almost surprising how far they've gone. They've gone a really long way. There's been a lot of statements. They stopped the cars on the track before the last race to really make a point. I think Bubba Wallace is going to have a Black Lives Matter livery for the next race. They're really going far. And I think as far as F1's standpoint goes, there's been a few answers from Ross Brawn when he's been asked about it directly. That's been the opportunity to ask him, means you get those comments. But the only proactive thing I think I've seen from them was one tweet at the end of the day when they had announced the whole new calendar. So it's kind of get their own business sorted first, and here's where we're going racing. Oh, and by the way, all this stuff that's been going on for quite a few days now, we also stand with it. So it just didn't give a great image, I don't think, in that sense.
But dare I say it, in F1's defence, I think the biggest thing that I've seen, and one of the things that really bothers me to a point, is that words are really easy to say. It's so easy to write a well-worded press statement saying, of course we're against racism. You know, well, who isn't publicly? But I think, I don't berate people for having not come out and making a statement. I think it's quite, although the world was calling for it, and it rightly so. I think bigger than that for me is I want a step-by-step plan. I want action points. I want to see movement. I don't want your empty words if that's all that they're good for. We want real change. The world is calling for real change, and as much as motorsport is its own little microcosm, it's still part of a reflection of society and the wider world. So, whilst F1 maybe hasn't had, also F1 hasn't had the same platform as NASCAR has had, because we're not racing yet. So I'll be interested to see what actually happens come July when we are racing again. And maybe there are plans in place, but it wouldn't be the time or place for F1 to maybe come up. What I would hate is we get a rush through statement of, we're going to do this, and then actually nothing of any real quality comes from it. So they made a statement, and I agree with Chris, it probably could have been timed a little better. As far as I was aware, there also wasn't anything on their websites. It was just a social media statement. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's all I saw. And it did come after they'd had their lovely, here's our official calendar and here's what's going on. So in that way, it felt like it fell quite flat. But I would wait weeks for them to come out with something if it meant that what they are actually doing is putting in place a hard and fast plan of here's how we're going to tackle this problem, because as we've covered, it's an innate problem currently. So I would forgive them for that personally.
I think when it comes to moving forward in the future, they've got to go back, haven't they, to grassroots. There's no other option. They've got to start rebuilding the whole system. And I know there are several people, Rob Smedley is one of those people, looking at initiatives to try and get different and more diverse communities coming into karting. But is cost the major prohibitive factor in having a diverse community within F1 generally?
I don't think it is. I think that it's exposure to the sport. You know, if you go to Barbados, a majority black nation, motor racing is huge there, massive participation. And at some point, somebody from the Caribbean, some talent from the Caribbean is going to come up and get all the way into Formula One or other top level racing. But, you know, one of the big reasons I got involved in motor racing is I grew up in Crystal Palace. And, you know, within, you know, a couple of kilometres of an old race circuit, which was abandoned at the time. And there was the Streatham kart track down the road, which I used to go to after school sometimes. So yeah, I had that exposure to motor racing because there was a dirty old kart track and an old race circuit just around the corner. But a lot of people don't have that, and actually that kart track's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a Tesco or something. And all of the kart tracks in London, I think now, are corporate driven, whereas that kart track was just, you know, turn up, pay your money, go and do some laps and open racing. It was good racing. And I think you need to see a lot more of that in urban centres. And that's something F1 could really drive, because these facilities don't cost a lot of money. They could fund the creation of them, and that drives participation in motorsport. It drives jobs as well. So it's a really good thing to do. But it's not just racing, rallying. Formula E's done a decent job of taking motor racing into cities, but ticket prices are really high, so people aren't going to go.
I think something that Sam and I spoke about in the past as well is that, you know, there's clearly a huge interest there if you put people in front of it. I think, I'm right in saying it was Jonathan Palmer, Sam mentioned in the previous chat we've had, that really wanted to actively engage with the black community within cities, because you could look at other interests that seem to go with that group that very much fit Formula One or racing, you know, interest in cars, interest in the automotive sector. So there's no reason that it shouldn't. But I do think cost is prohibitive for everyone. And realistically, I think that's where it goes hand in hand a bit with the wider world issues, which is why, you know, we can't ignore it, is because if in the wider world you're finding that basically white males are climbing the ladder and getting better pay than their counterparts on certain levels, then something that is expensive is going to be more open to that sort of person, and therefore you are just making it even harder, and it's self-perpetuating. So you do have to address, I'd say, both. But I think Sam's also right, there's not going to be just one. If you just go, oh, we'll make it cheaper, therefore everything will be fine, that's clearly not going to be the case either.
We are running out of time very quickly, and I know we could talk about this all day and probably all night as well if we were an F1 race, but let's move things on and talk about the calendar, because we have one at last. We do have 8 races. It starts Austria, double header on the 5th of July, and then goes on to Hungary, and then on to the rest of the world with Silverstone, Spain, Spa and Italy. So who wants to go first? Is anybody going to Austria that we have here?
Looks like it. Oh, just me. Oh.
Excellent. We've got one taker.
Yeah, I've been sort of told what the protocol would be and been sounded out, but admittedly, I don't think anything's confirmed yet, and there's still discussions about who gets to go and trying to find out who wants to go, because obviously certain people wouldn't want to, whether it's worth going for the access you're going to get. It's all about restarting safely, which means there's still plenty of questions that need answering before anything's going to be set in stone, I think.
Is it just me, or is anyone else still reeling as to why we're not starting at Silverstone?
I know. I think starting at Silverstone, the way the virus outbreak in the UK is and the way the government is handling it at the moment, I'm still sceptical that we're even going to get those 2 Silverstone races in. I really am not optimistic about those races. And with the 2-week quarantine, will they, won't they, going on, Silverstone just wasn't prepped. The UK isn't ready for a major sporting event. So, no, I'm not surprised by that.
Okay, and I mean, going to the home of Red Bull, Jess, does this give the advantage to Verstappen and Verstappen fans this year?
Well, it's going to be so interesting because we've never had this long in between racing, or at least testing. So we don't really know where things are lining up. We obviously got to see a glimpse of it at testing, but as we all know, you know, how much can you glean from testing with teams kind of trying to keep cards close to their chest. So I would say it seems to favour the Bulls. Well, it has, at least over the past 2 years, but also Mercedes have got a good track record there as well. So I mean, if I'm going to put my money on it, I mean, I would love for Red Bull to come out of the gates swinging with a couple of wins under their belt. I think that would really create some real drama straight off the get-go, rather than what we've had in previous years, which is just Mercedes one after the other. I mean, the start of last season was quite depressing if you're into your competitive seasons. So I mean, I'd be all for it, and Max has got a great track record there, so it would be definitely an interesting one. So yeah, I mean, why not a Verstappen, maybe even a Verstappen back to back, who knows.
Honda have got something special up their sleeve.
Yeah.
You could hear it and smell it in F1 testing, and they refuse to talk about it in any detail. So keep an eye on those Honda engine cars, because I think they've got something very special.
Red Bull were very quietly confident, which they've been a few years they've had where they've seemed to have had a bit of confidence there. But there's also been other years when they've come out and said, yeah, we've still got work to do with this car. It's got good potential, but give us a bit of time to unlock it. And we see them finishing strongly. So for them to just seem, a little bit more confidence at this stage of the season is interesting. And another thing, like Jess mentions, like Mercedes are always quick at Austria, but seem to have reliability issues fairly regularly there. It's been a bit of an Achilles heel for them. But where you could say, okay, there's no guarantees you're going to get that again, when it's the first race of the season, that's normally when reliability issues creep up more often. Like when strategists work out what's going to happen in Australia, they factor that in a bit more. So hopefully that added kind of element will mean that Mercedes is certainly going to be made to work hard for it if they do come out of the box with the quickest car still.
Maybe Sam will back me up here though, because obviously we're going to Austria about just over a month earlier than we ordinarily would, and temperature seems to be a Achilles heel for Mercedes, so they might not have as much reliability issue. I'm not sure. It's just something that popped into my head because it was their overheating problems that Austria was like in August was just not the place for them, really, was it?
We did see some reliability wobbles in testing from Mercedes, but the problem is they've all been sat at home fiddling around on their laptops, and now they're back in the factory fiddling around with metal bits. We don't really know what sort of development's gone on in that timescale, so we've got a big mystery over who's done what in this weird period we've all been living through.
That's a good point. I'm going to annoy Jenny by jumping in again to follow up on Sam, but he's the technical guy on this. But we've also got, as Jess mentions about racing in August, because we've got the different calendar set up. I mean, we're meant to be going to Spain now in August. I mean, surely that's going to be roasting. I mean, and Hungary is always hot anyway. Going there in July, middle of July, surely there's going to be a proper test for reliability here now that we don't have that mid-season break in the middle of August.
It's going to be great.
Perfect.
I think there's certainly a lot of unknowns, aren't there? Going into a season, as you said, the drivers have had the biggest break they'll have ever had in their careers. The engineers, the mechanics, all of them might be in slightly different roles and slightly different operating systems. They're all going to be wearing face masks and protective gear. There's a lot of elements to take into your brain, let alone into your performance and operating systems.
Someone's going to balls it up and it's going to make it absolutely spectacular to watch. I think you're going to see really unpredictable racing. I'm all for it. I mean, NASCAR have done this thing of getting away with practice and qualifying. and just going and having a race. It's been brilliant. This little sort of restarted NASCAR season. There's a race tonight actually, and it's been absolutely sensational to watch. The action's been so unpredictable, and it's just what Formula One needs. A little bit something to mix it all up.
So I want to ask you, before we wrap things up, after the first 8 races, who do you think will be leading the championship?
Lewis Hamilton.
Lewis Hamilton.
I really want to say somebody else just to mix it up, but I just don't think you can put a lot of doubt behind Hamilton right now. So I think it will be closer than it has been in many seasons before this, but I think he will pip it to the top just.
I think, like Jess says, the first 3 races could well see Verstappen coming out of those 3 in the lead, because Hungary, again, is one where Red Bull have been strong in the past. And if you can get qualifying right there, they had trouble with Lewis being able to try a different strategy last year, but Verstappen probably should have won that race. So there's every chance at that stage we could have someone else leading. So it'll be harder for Lewis, but I just think then when you go Silverstone and Spain, Spa, Monza, I think it's more likely that Merck are going to rise to the top.
Having a look at the results from last year, if you take the first supposed 8 races of this year and play them out from 2019, then Hamilton would be leading by 157 points, Leclerc on 138, Bottas 121, and Verstappen 110. And none of you have mentioned Ferrari in this at all.
That's because they're going to blow up. They're slow. The car didn't work in testing.
Yeah, they did not sound confident at all.
There we go. You heard it here. Right, guys, I'm going to let you all go. Thank you so much for being part of this new programme. Let's see how it goes and where it goes. And let's see what happens, more importantly, in Austria and for the F1 season of 2020. Into the unknown.
Looking forward to it.